on my website. So if you've missed one, that's where they'll be. All right, so today is the last methods workshop for the fall. We will be doing a new set of workshops for the spring. So if you have any ideas or any requests, please feel free to email me, as I'm currently trying to work on that and make some choices. So here's just kind of an overlook or overview of what we've done so far. And so today we will be moving on to sentiment analysis. So a real quick agenda is that we'll be doing just a brief overview. We'll review some text mining basics and learning analytics process. Again, that was our last video, so please check out the website if you missed it and you're interested in learning more about that. And then we're going to move to dictionary-based text mining, which is how we're going to do sentiment analysis, and then do a lab example. So a very brief review. So text mining basics, if you remember, I learned a lot about this, and a lot of these slides come from, with permission to reuse, the Laser Institute at North Carolina State University last summer, and then a couple summers ago. In here, they use RCode or PositCloud or RStudio. So a lot of the things I'll share with you, which if you look through this, I think it's in the slides, the link for the lab is in that slide from last time. And you'll be able to access this one as well through that. And then the main goal with text mining is quantifying the text. So taking documents such as discussion posts, open-ended responses, transcripts, and being able to quantify large amounts of text. And so some of the things we talked about last week or last time was text pre-processing, doing word counts, term frequencies, TF, IDF, and word clouds, which was super riveting, if you remember. But it was the basic or the basis for what we're doing moving forward. And then today we're going to talk about dictionary-based methods, specifically sentiment analysis. And so again, a key resource, and this book is available online for free, which is amazing. Text Mining with R, A Tidy Approach. And again, just a reminder of the learning analytics workflow is that you prepare the data, wrangle the data, explore the data, model. So a lot of people think this is where text mining takes you, just to the explore. But when you actually want to do the model, there's still a statistical analysis that needs to be run once you use the text mining, and then communicate or disseminate your findings. So dictionary-based methods. So dictionary-based text analyses use predefined list of words or lexicons to assign a particular meaning, value, or category to each word in your data. Now, this says each word, and the stuff that I'm going to be doing today is at the word level, but then there are other things you could do. We talked about it briefly last time about n-grams or sentences, etc. And so that there are custom dictionaries, which basically people have built, and a lot of these are available in R and some are available elsewhere. Stop words, words that like a, the, and, which will come up a lot in your text, but don't really add a lot of meaning. And so you can use stop words to remove those non-essential words out. Sentiment lexicons, which we're going to talk about today. And then linguistic inquiry word count, or LIWC, which I'll actually also be showing you a little bit today. And then another great citation for you, a reference. So here's an example of what sentiment analysis will do using the Bing dictionary, which again, I'll break down those dictionaries for you in a second, is it will take a word and apply a specific sentiment to that word. So achievements would get a positive one, cataclysm would be tagged with negative, prudent would be positive, fabricate negative, deservedly positive. There's plenty of other words that will not be assigned a positive or negative, but what this will do is it will give you a number for how many positives and how many negatives are in a specific whatever you define, right? So it could be in a response, it could be across a group of responses, how positive and negative are the are the text of what these people are talking about. So what is sentiment analysis? It's summing up the values related to each word in a document, and then you'll be able to find out the tone or sentiment of the whole document. So here's kind of what it looks like in R. So that you have the text data. We talked about this last time. If you need to unnest the tokens, which means you need to break it down to the word or sentence or whatever you're going to be doing it using the tidy text. So here's all the different functions in R to help you remember. But of course, you also have access to the script. And then tidy text, you're going to apply a sentiment lexicon, and then you're going to group by or summarize. Maybe you want to group by a collaborative group, or group by a certain class, or group by a certain topic. And then you're going to summarize the text. And then you can, from there, you can do different kinds of statistical analyses, like comparing different groups, etc. So let's look at some of the dictionaries that are commonly used. And so let me just preface, I chose the 3, I think, most commonly used, but there are tons out there. For example, there's one that you might see in the lab, but it's meant for financial documents. And so I'm not going to talk about that here because we're in the field of education and we don't see a lot of that. But I really like those because they provide context. And I'll have a funny story to tell you about how important that context is in a second. So AFIN is the first one. And what this does is not just assign positive and negative. It gives a weight to it. So some words are more negative than others. I could think of a couple 4-letter words, right? That have they're curse words. Okay, have a harsher meaning. So if someone says, "Oh no," and that might be a -1, and if they say, "Oh, beep," that might be a -5, right? So it adds some kind of a scale to it, so you can see more positive versus less positive. Being, however, the one I just showed you just does positive or negative, so it would evaluate those 2 phrases similarly. And then NRC does different categories, and I'll show you, I have an example of what that looks like in a second. And so which one do you use? Well, it depends on what you're trying to use it for, right? I like the AFIN because it shows different, shows that weights. And when I'm comparing different groups, I think it's important to capture that. But the categories also kind of make sense. And I'll show you again what those look like. And again, each of these are free to use in R. You just have to load in the library. So let's take a look at so these all come from the same data set. So this is what AFIN would do. And I don't like that it's done this, but so you can see that about, and I don't remember which data set this came from. So close to 1,000 participants or words or whatever the document was, got a -2 value. So about 1,000, I think it's words, got a -2 value. And then the next most common was a 2, and then a -1, a -3. And so then all the way down to 5. So very few were very, very, very positive. Whereas being, it's just positive or negative. So this group was more negative than positive, or this document. But then NRC, and again, I think there's more categories here. This will only show the categories that show up. It does negative and positive as well. Oh, these must be different data sets now that or no, that's 5,000 up there, so they could be the same. And then, but it also does specifically fear, anger, trust, sadness. It feels like I'm watching Inside Out here. And so that gives you more specific emotions, so not just negative or positive, which might be something that you're looking at, especially if you're using, for example, Reiner Peckard's control value theory, and you're looking specifically at joy over surprise, or joy over trust, based on different antecedents. You know, you might want to use NRC instead of AFIN. Any questions before I go to the lab example? Ooh, great question in the chat. How culturally sensitive are these dictionaries? Is there anything important to keep in mind in cross-cultural studies? That is such an excellent question. These were created and they're validated and all that kind of stuff, but this is something that's very important to consider. So not only do I not think that they're culturally sensitive typically, they also, again, are just kind of missing context. And so let me kind of go back. These three dictionaries are really used in general, right? So it's very possible that somewhere someone has created a more culturally sensitive dictionary, but the time that it takes to do that and the effort, you don't see a lot of these coming out. So it's possible that some out there are more culturally sensitive than others. That's why when I use this, I very rarely use these kind of as alone as my only measure that I'm going to be using, because I think it's a good start to look at something, but I think it doesn't get the full context. So one of the ways I've used it is when I have a bunch of groups and I need to determine which one, like representative case studies. So the group that talked more positively, or the group that talked more negatively. This gives me a good look at like a glimpse of who's more positive and who's negative, but I'll connect that with other sources, other multimodal. So I should have prefaced that. Thank you so much again for the question. Such an interesting and thoughtful question. I definitely think this is a great addition to that mix of multimodal, different ways to measure emotions in learning. But that's 100% something to think about. And so you can access the libraries and see for yourself all the different options. And so in the lab, what we're going to look at is an analysis of this question right here. What is the public sentiment expressed towards the next generation science standards? And how does sentiment for the next generation science standards compare to sentiment for the Common Core state standards? So these both are common in the US, I think less so in Canada. But National Geographic, next generation science standards are just for science, and Common Core state standards are for math and reading or literacy. And so generally, I'll give you a background. Common Core was implemented in a way that it was just poor implementation for the most part. And so it did receive a lot of backlash from parents and teachers, whereas next generation science, and it was also Common Core state standards were implemented in all but 4 of the states in the US, whereas the next generation science standards, at last time I checked, was implemented in a lot fewer states, and they were taken up much slower and much more thoughtfully. So that's the background. I'm spoiling. I know I'm spoiling. But things to think about when you're looking at this is, we're also comparing 2 different domains. How people talk about math is very different than how they talk about other subjects from a cultural kind of standpoint. So, these are the things that we need to kind of think about, but I think that this is a really great start to kind of understand this. So again, you should have access. It should be in the last slides that I put on my website, but I will, I'll put another link in here. So this is the Twitter sentiment and school reform. So this will walk you through everything. I'm going to skip through and kind of hit the main points so that we can ask questions and kind of see how this works. So again, just an overview of the learning analytics workflow. To prepare, you can actually see this was actually published in a paper. So if this is interesting to you, there's a link in here and then the abstract. And then it talks about the data and source. So I think it's still possible, but it's less easy to access is that you used to be able to access tweets from Twitter. You had to sign up and do a couple things, but it wasn't that difficult. Now that it's X and other factors that have changed about Twitter or X have made it a bit harder to access this. But this data was just, again, we talked about it recently in that free data that you can access and run different analyses on. And so that's what they did. And so they looked at tweets with hashtag NGSS and hashtag CCSS. That's not going to capture, or did they get tweets with any of the following phrases? So they also, because not everyone uses hashtag, they also did Common Core and things like that. So what they did is they filtered and that they pulled thousands and thousands of tweets, and then they ran them through this to do a sentiment analysis and look at the two different groups. Okay. So these were their guiding questions: is what is the sentiment around that, and then how does it differ? Again, you have access to this, but you have to read in some of these. You might have to install the packages first in R before you can read in the library. And so here it actually walks you through how to pull it out of Twitter. These again might be a little old. These might be more Twitter and less X. So I'm not sure if you can still do this, or if it, how exactly to do that. I haven't tried since it's come to X. But again, there are the steps in there. So again, importing the tweets, and then I wanted to skip down to, so here I think they ran it with all 3 dictionaries. I'm trying to, or maybe they did a 4th one too. So reading it in, I'm trying to skip down to the thing. And so here they, and this is where they start to unnest. So right now the tweets can be up to however many characters, because that changed. So some of them will be shorter than others because they're required to be. And so then what this does is it nests them, it takes them apart and looks at the word. So this one's really important if you want to look at it by the word. But sometimes you can apply it to the whole tweet or utterance or whatever it is that you're doing. Then you're going to remove the stop words, the, and there's some other ones in there. And again, you can access this and see like what are the words in there. You can also do anti-join and put in your own. Okay, so here's it's not, I say funny story, and it's funny for me. Probably won't be funny at all for you, but so if you remember back in 2020, AURA was canceled because of the pandemic. And so then the year after, they still didn't have an in-person, and so it was all virtual, and there was a lobby. And the lobby was very difficult to get in and out of. People got stuck there. And so a friend of mine, they did something similar with sentiment analysis, and we're comparing tweets about AURA 2021 and AURA 2019. No one thought, again, I thought it was like, yeah, of course, the virtual one's going to be more negative. And so what they found was that the word lobby in one of these dictionaries, in the dictionary they used, had like a very high negative number. Because in the big context, like lobby, when you think of like politicians and lobbying, so I think every time someone said lobby, it was like -4. Which the way people were using lobby in these tweets was primarily negative, but the context, was very different. So, and there's other words so here's an option of like, when you're looking, you can add in your own words to remove and say, don't include lobby because it's not looking at it the way that I need it to. In that case, you could make the argument that it was okay to leave in, but that's not the way it was intended. So That's where it gets a little tricky. And one of, again, the huge drawbacks here. And so then these are the words that are left. So common, of course. So here's another example of like common core. Well, they're talking about common core. So if common, and I don't think so, but if core has like a sentiment attached to that word, then of course, every time a CCSS one is used that says core, it's going to be assigned a negative where NGSS doesn't have that word in it. So that could be something that's added to your stop words because it's just throwing off the data. So that's one of the really important things about Explore. So you ran your text mining, you get your results, but trying to make sense of like, is this an accurate representation of what I'm trying to do? And so I'm skipping through some stuff. I want to get, okay, so the sentiment of, the sentiment values. What I love about this, again, I'm not going to read these, is if this is something that you're really interested in doing, it gives very thoughtful explanation. It explains all the stuff. It walks you through. So please look at this on your own. I'm just trying to hit the highlights. So here you can see a bit of the AFIN. So anytime they said abandon, 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 abandons, it's a -2. Abhorrent is slightly more negative, right? Because abandon versus abhorrent, I would have thought it was even higher than that. Whereas being, again, just as negative or positive. So you can see, let me see if there's any overlap. Aborted would become lower. So some words that show up in Bing do not show up in AFIN, because they're two completely different dictionaries created by different people, validated on different studies. So something to also think about. And then here's the NRC. I love this. Someone was talking about an abacus, and then the sentiment for that was trust. Because I guess you can trust an abacus, because do y'all know what an abacus is? Like the old school, like you count. Okay. Whereas abandon was put under fear and negative. So do you see here how the same word, 6, 7, and 8 are all the same word, but it was given 3 different sentiments. So that's important to also consider, because the other ones do not do that. Each one should have one response. So you want to be really careful here if you want to compare, you know, that obviously fear is a negative emotion. And so you wouldn't want to compare fear to negative, because there's some underlying structure there that would be very conflicting. And then Lawfren is the other one that was the financial literacy. And so here they're going to start combining the different values. And so this person, this tweet, again, this is all publicly available data. So this person, this screen name, tweeted about NGSS on this date. And the one word that, this must be AFIN, yeah. The one word from what they said that had a value was when. And so that gave that a 4. Whereas this Shelton, you can see these are all the same. Well, so 3 of these are the same tweet, 4. But there are 1, 2, 3, 4 words that had a sort of tone, a negative, positive tone. And so right now they're kept separate, but you can add them together. So do you see how, again, all of these are the same person, and it looks like they went tweet happy on the same day. They had some thoughts. They had a couple different, or a few different tweets. And again, this has 1,530 more rows, which means different words in all of these tweets. And so here's Bing. And so again, things that you can do. So what this does is this takes the data and reorganizes it in a way to help you capture this sentiment. So then what do you do from there? So you can look at, so here's a time series, right? So you can look at the days I don't know if something happened, maybe new legislature passed or something, or, you know, if you're looking at a discussion post, maybe the day after you give grades back, the discussions were more negative or something, or maybe more positive. So again, that's really important to think about that context piece. And then again, these kind of summaries of, so here's a perfect example for Bing. They looked at, I think one is NGSS, or no, I'm sorry. This is, it should just be one. Oh, no, this is across both of them. I don't know why they would have combined them. Here's where they separated it. And you can see that, and here they don't, and that's where you got to be careful too with AFIN, is that if you just add them together, the positives might cancel out some of the negatives. Whereas here, you can really break apart positives and negatives. You can do it with AFIN too, but you got to be really careful. So here you can see that there were a lot of negative comments about Common Core. And so, I mean, this is really stark, not only comparing Common Core to NGSS, but also just within Common Core and within NGSS. Another huge finding here is look at the difference of how many total for Common Core and how many total for NGSS. Like I said, NGSS is not in every state. A lot fewer people know about it than they do Common Core. I think NGSS 2 is in not every grade, whereas Common Core starts in 3rd grade, and at least in math and literacy, I think every grade after that, and some other ones. So then again, then it kind of just shows you compute, what am I saying? Compute the sentiment value. And so, and then there's a bunch more after that. So, and then NRC does the same thing where you can kind of compare. And so this is kind of, again, how to, and this is all in R, and whenever I use it, I literally copy and paste. And I've done this with my dissertation. Like I said, I studied small groups, and I look at how the way they talk changed over time and how it's different between groups and things like that. And so before I show you Luke, are there any questions about the lab in R in general? And so again, one of the ways that they did in here is they just kind of sum them together. But you could also compare groups, right? So if you, for example, the Twitter, you can compare the different dates, or you can tag everything before a certain date as a 1 or a 0, and everything after is a 1, and then do like a t-test to see if it was different, you know, that way. There's a bunch of different things you can do. So then, the last thing I am going to talk about is Luke. I've heard it pronounced a bunch of different ways, but I've always called it Luke. Some people say LIWC, but I've always Luke, yeah, or yeah, whatever. So next time you hear Luke, you're like, who? So Luke has many more categories. So let's see if I can click on this and it actually worked. What do we think? So this is the manual that you can, you can do this. Okay, so in this manual, just to give you a perspective, you scroll down, and again, so this is what Luke looks like. It has some similar, like it'll count pronouns. It does give you some examples. Psychological processes. So most of the people I've seen in that use Luke are in like psychology and cognitive psychology. So it'll do drives, which is kind of a motivation, cognition. It will do affect. And so what I really like about it is it does, positive emotion, and which is more of like words that actually relate to an emotion. But then they also do positive tone, words that are positive in meaning, but don't necessarily connect to a word. What's interesting is it has a positive emotion and a negative emotion, but the negative emotion has specific examples, but the positive emotion does not. I like that they gave you examples of swear words in case you didn't know what those were. And then social processes. And then there's all kinds of culture. So here, but again, you have to look. This is a perfect example of like, culture could be interesting, but what do they mean by culture? And again, these are just some examples. Lifestyle. So this is more of like, what are they talking about? Are they talking, is their response related to lifestyle? Is it related to physical health and things like that, or different states and stuff? So Luke has, again, many more categories, but it's its own application. It's not within R. I think we've tried to get the library into R, and it's not the easiest to do, but it's really easy to use, but it comes with a price tag. And so I put the link up there. I think you can get like a 30-day use for maybe like $20-some, but then the perpetual license is closer to $200. So, if you're only going to use it once versus use it a bunch. So let's take a look at Luke. So as you can see, again, it's its independent kind of app. And it's really straightforward. Import your data set. So I'm going to put in a CSV file. I am going to do something from my dissertation. This was my group that rated themselves as low. And so this is what the data looks like. Different turns, different meetings. So that was meeting 1. I think I combined it. It won't let me go down any further. To only the first 100, but I think there was like 7 total meetings, and then the week, which group it is, who is speaking, and what they're saying. And so then I can choose different dictionaries. And so I use the Luke. I know it's hard to see, and I don't think I can zoom in. But then there's all kinds of custom dictionaries that you can find. So once you have access, you can find other ones that were, I think, kind of really interesting. And then just kind of import them into here. There's usually get more dictionaries. And so this takes you to a web page. What's really cool about Luke is that it is available in other languages. So when I was talking to my friend from Finland and we're talking about using this in sentiment analysis, they would have to translate every single thing in order to run it, unless they were speaking in English. And Finnish is not on here, but they do have other ones, I think, including French. There it is. So could even use that. But then they also have these user-made dictionaries where anybody can make a dictionary and upload them, and it has the author. And then these are for specific things. And so this kind of gets at the question earlier about the kind of cultural sensitivity. There might be something in here, like this one is a body type. And so it's kind of connected to specific frameworks, controversial terms, cost benefit. So if there's something in there that you look very specifically at, this could be helpful, but there's a lot in here. And then you would load that dictionary and run that. So again, what the dictionary does is just says, okay, I'm using this dictionary. So if I see these words, I'm going to assign it these values. Which I guess technically, if you had a list of all hundreds of these, you could use control find and do it yourself, right? But these have been kind of validated. But the thing with control find, again, too, is like if I wanted to do, I think one of the words like abandon, right? It was abandon, abandons, abandoning. And so getting all that is a little bit trickier. So I'm just going to use the Luke, the first one, and then here are the categories. So I can click all of them. I think here I just did, I'll just do affect. Segmentation. So again, if I want to change how I segment to a word or a define segments based on special characters, like a period, like a sentence kind of thing. And then I have to actually run it to get my results. I hit OK, but I didn't actually see what it says. The data set tab, and select which ones. Okay, thank you. It says use first row as a header, treat each cell as a separate text. I will do that for utterance. And so this has thousands and thousands of rows, and it was that quick. So 8,900 rows, and it was that quick. And so now you have a new data set. And then what this does is it says it takes, turn 1, 2, 3. And you can see some of these are going to be zeros. So here is the text. And it tells you the affect. That's a decimal in there. That's not 14,000. I don't think. And then there's a bunch of zeros. That means in that certain thing, he didn't say anything negative. He didn't talk about emotions, etc. Yeah, so I think that's a 14.29. And again, how it's calculated is a little bit different. But again, affect was a overarching category, so it should equal, as long as I've clicked everything, kind of the sum. So the reason that these two look the same is it's this plus all the zeros is this. But some of these, I'm surprised no doesn't have one. But some of these don't have any. I'm surprised. I'm sorry. So here's an example of kind of, you're looking in here. I'd have really thought that I'm sorry would have been something, but it didn't do that. So with that, and I think that's why I do think this is a really great tool to take large amounts of data and apply meaning to it, but it has its flaws, which is another reason why I usually don't use it by itself. I use it to supplement other data or to provide a bit more insight. And so then there's all of these tools that, if I'm being honest, I don't even really know how to use. I'm very excited to learn though. But most people just use this as Luke. And then I think what some of the other ones do is you can kind of do what the next steps in are of like, right, if I can combine it by groups or combine it by person, of like how positive was, what are one of the names? These are all made up names, by the way. How positive was Liz over time? How positive was Jason? And I think one of the things I found when I did this in R was that Jason had a lot more negative comments, right? And so then you get to look at, did he then have an influence? So that's some of the other analyses that you can run, is looking at social contagion and emotional contagion and those kind of things. But so all this does is it helps me take my data and then quantify it in a way that has meaning. But hopefully you can see that if I clicked every single one of those buttons, this would be absolutely massive. So I always suggest having, your research questions ahead of time. Your choices should be purposeful, no p-hacking, etc. Right. Any questions specific to Luke? And then I'll open it up to any questions in general? All right, any questions in general? Yeah.
It's kind of like it's not free, right? It's like a commercial tool.
It's not free. Is that what you said? It's not free?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh yeah, Luke. Yeah, Luke is not free.
So like, if it's not free, like if the organization or lab want to use it, like how like, they can.
Yeah, so that's something that is a really great point. So you want to use Luke, you don't want to spend a lot of money. What do you do? One, you could say, well, I'm just going to use R and then use R. Or you can talk to your supervisor, and it might be worth purchasing for the lab. And so I know that's something I plan on doing. I have it on my personal computer for now. If somebody, I know this, we ran data really quickly on it, but then eventually I'll have it on my lab computer. So if somebody wants to use it, they can. Yeah, it's things that you'll have to come in, but better than paying all the perpetual license and stuff like that. I mean, it's possible it's available in like a computer lab somewhere on campus, but I don't think so. Which leads me to my next point, is that it's not, again, when you're publishing on this, how much explanation do you need, right? So in certain fields, this technique and Luke especially are more common and more acceptable. So you can say, oh yeah, Luke, I know him. Whereas in other fields like education, it's used somewhat, but not a lot. So you're going to have to really, like in the method section, you're going to have to be more clear about what it is, versus in other fields. I also see it a lot in AI and ed. There can be more of a hand waving of like, oh yeah, sentiment analysis, here's a citation, Luke, moving on. So that's another thing to think about.
Yeah. You were talking about the stop words and how like you look through them and sometimes have to manually decide to include some stop words. Is there any times when there's a word and you don't know whether including it or excluding it is like more biased? I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's where, and transparency is so important. So, when you're talking about your methods and we use, that's something I would include in my analyses, right? Of like, we included stop words, and then we added these words that just our specific context. So this context was pharmacy, right? So there was something, I forget what it was, something that they talk about that has a really negative context in the, like blood or something like that, or, they talk about it like it's just part of it, right? And so that was tricky. And I am not a content expert. I worked with content experts. And so that's also tricky of like what something might seem to me and my understanding of the situation. And so that's why some people just don't mess with it. And they're like, it'll all kind of work itself out in the wash. Especially if you're comparing groups, technically, as long as you're using the same methods for all, that's what I think some people will just say like, it'll work itself out because it's, equally right for everyone. But when you think about like, NGSF, like you have two very different situations where they're going to be using different words than others. It gets tricky. So I think you have to just document everything. So that's why some people would say, nope, the stop words that are created, I think most people just say, yep, those are approved, but then they just don't touch it. Because again, it adds in that researcher bias and that kind of stuff. These are the same people that hate on qualitative stuff. So, but I think that's important, for you to make as a decision as a researcher, and then just document as much as possible. But great question. Other questions? Okay, I'm gonna stop recording here.